it's always good to win homecoming when you invent homecoming. So really appreciative to our team, and then to keep the Mayor's Cup in the real Columbia, that's always something special too.
Super proud of how we started and ultimately how we finished. Proud of that last drive, and super proud of our team. That was a team win.
A lot of games left, and we've set up a November to remember.
And welcome back into the Tiger Kickoff Show, presented by the Columbia Missourian. I'm your host, Harrison Vapnek from KOMU Sports, joined alongside the beat writers of the MU football team, Wendell Shepherd, Ryerson, Brandon Haynes. It was a very happy homecoming here in the good Columbia. Tigers come out with the win. How are you feeling?
Pretty good. Comfortable win. Mizzou's back in the win column 2 weeks in a row. Now they're rolling.
Everyone have a good homecoming weekend?
Yeah.
It was a good time.
It was a very crowded Columbia. I saw an Adam Ryerson post on X about how, it's homecoming when there's I forget what exactly what he said.
I was driving back from playing a round of golf at Tanglewood, and I was in bumper-to-bumper traffic for about 30 minutes, and it kind of made me feel good. I think it's one of the very few times I'm not angry about being in traffic, but got a little juice from the tweet, so I wasn't mad about it.
It's everybody coming home, but it was a good homecoming for everyone who was in Columbia. A 34-12 win for the Tigers over South Carolina to improve to 7-1 on the year. It was the best game of the season from the defense. Brady Cook threw for just under 200 passing yards with a passing touchdown and a rushing touchdown. Tigers led wire to wire in the game. Wendell, I'll start over with you. This was the best game I think the Tigers have had start to finish all season long. What was the key to the win?
The defense was just completely dominant. I believe only 69 rushing yards allowed. And going back to the Kentucky game, they haven't allowed a touchdown in 7 quarters of football, and that's just really impressive. And I think this is what fans have been waiting to see from this defense all season, because the defense coming into this year was people were expecting to be the best unit, best part of the team. That wasn't necessarily the case. Offense kind of took away some of that thunder, but I think the defense is back and showing that they're still really good.
Adam, what was your big takeaway from the win?
For me, it's the fact that Mizzou has been able to win in different ways. So just like Wendell said, recently we've been talking about the defense a lot in the last 2 games because they've been playing very well. But the offense was also winning Mizzou games earlier in the year, and then even against Kentucky, you see the special teams play of the fake punt from Luke Bauer for the touchdown really projected to them to that win. So I think just being able to win in different ways, it's a sign of being a good team. You aren't relying on one unit to win everything for you, and like the team has said, I don't think that we've seen a complete game from every unit on the field. So when that comes, I think that Missouri is really going to hit its stride. So I think if they can keep finding different places to win the game, then they're going to be in a really good spot going forward.
Yeah, it felt almost pretty balanced that they were able to run the ball well at times. When the passing they needed, they hit the big pass to Burden early in the game, the big pass to Burden late in the game. The defense obviously consistent the whole game. I think it's just having a balance on offense and defense, and then maybe, again, they'll put together a 4-quarter performance. Brandon, over to you. What was your big takeaway, especially on that offensive side, that led to the success and the win?
Yeah, I think one of the strongest units on the field on Saturday was the offensive line. We've talked about the struggles about penalties and stuff like that, but they had 1 penalty throughout the game, a false start. But other than that, they looked solid. They didn't allow a sack against South Carolina's defensive line, which, they aren't the most premier of talents, but it's still an impressive mark, especially against an SEC opponent, to go out there, especially with the struggles they've had all season. So I think the offensive line was definitely much improved, and discipline in general has been a point of emphasis for Drinkwitz. Apparently he brought in officials at practice throughout last week and the week before just to kind of get that repetition in of playing with officials, kind of limiting those penalties. I think that's starting to pay off, and that's a big area where they needed to improve on as they continue SEC play.
Tracking back to that defensive improvement, I think the last 7 quarters of football they've played have been the defense's best 7 quarters all season long. Only 1 touchdown allowed. I think you had the stat before. It was 72
to 19. Mizzou's outscored opponents in the last 7 quarters of football. Only 1 touchdown allowed, and they've just been playing really lights out.
I think that's pretty good. What has been the ultimate key over these past 7 quarters, since going down 14-0 to Kentucky and since whatever happened in the last 3 quarters against LSU? What has turned the corner for Blake Baker's group, Wendell?
We were talking in the press box, just like they were hitting harder. Tackling was an issue in some earlier games, even though they still won. There were some missed tackles early on in that Kentucky game when Ray Davis was going crazy, but they were hitting really hard against South Carolina. And you didn't see any missed tackles. There was a lot of game tackles. And I think the defensive line has been getting pressure all season, but they're finally starting to get more of that end product with tackles for loss, sacks. So I think them just being more aggressive is what we're seeing.
Adam, you talked earlier about this team, they're kind of figuring themselves out more. What has the defense kind of figured out that they're not giving up as many lapses on big plays in terms of that unit of the ball?
They've just been a lot more disciplined in their assignments and in their coverage, in their gap coverage. Drinkwitz recently has talked about how while they are getting the pressure and the havoc rate that they want to, they weren't really getting home for sacks. They got 6 sacks this week. So they were able to stay in their gap, get to Spencer Rattler, and they were able to make a bunch of plays in the backfield and keep them behind the line of scrimmage. And when they were able to do that, then they had to cover, which was something we talked about earlier. They weren't doing great in man coverage. A lot of touchdowns were thrown against man coverage. Now it looks like they've really kind of hit their stride in that sense, and they haven't really been blowing any assignments. We're not seeing receivers run wide open with nobody covering them within 15 yards. And when they are getting catches in space, typically it's followed by a tackle after a very short yards after catch. So I think if they can continue to do that and they can continue to rely on Chris Abrams-Drain and Ennis Rakestraw, who was able to play a little bit of limited snap count last week, and he still had some big plays in man coverage. If they can keep doing that, then they're going to be able to keep limiting these passing offenses.
And those two guys you just mentioned, I think Rakestraw, the bye comes at a great time for him.
Oh, yeah.
Got to get him healthy because, Georgia's got some of the best receivers in the country. He needs to be at 100%. And Chris Abrams-Drain was a mid-season All-American. Mm-hmm. He's right in the thick of the Thorpe Award conversation for best defensive back in all of college football. And he thought he had another strong game, didn't have another interception. But, I know Xavier Leggett went down in the first quarter, which was a huge loss for the Gamecocks and kind of decided that one for their offense. I think if KAD can keep playing great, it could be a final season All-American for him. Brandon, in what ways can this defense even take a step up going forward? Because I don't think they're going to give up one touchdown every 7 quarters for the next 4 games. But what ways can they continue to keep up this pace against Georgia, who has a great offense? Tennessee's got a good offense. Even Florida. It's a huge stretch coming up. Can they keep this up?
I think the biggest thing is just consistency, and especially with wreaking that havoc on the defensive line. Obviously, you got several guys who are injured, starting to come back from injury, and I think the biggest thing is going to be getting healthy. If you get guys back healthy, Chad Bailey was one who missed this past game. Ennis Rakestraw has been limited in weeks before. Obviously, Darius Robinson dealt with a calf injury. There's a lot of guys, and Tyron Hopper left Saturday's game. So there's a lot of guys dealing with injuries, and that comes with playing, obviously, 8 weeks in a row. So just kind of come out and get healthy and remain consistent and apply that pressure. And Mizzou is peaking at the right time defensively. You needed this coming into a bye week. You have something to build upon. You have the momentum going for you. Now you have a week to kind of refresh, restart, plan ahead, and you got a big matchup against Georgia coming up, obviously. So I think this bye couldn't have come at a better time for getting healthy and building that consistency as you go forward.
Going back to the offensive side, Schrader ran for a career-high 159 yards on 26 carries, 2 touchdowns. Burden 90 yards. Mookie Cooper caught 6 passes, which I think might be a season high for him. How did the offense have so much success in that first half, Wendell?
As we mentioned earlier, the offensive line was just completely dominant in that first half. We were talking about during the game, there were most plays when Cody Schrader was rushing the ball, he was getting 5-7 yards downfield before he was ever getting touched. They were just opening really wide running lanes, and that was opening up the passing game too. I think that's where it started, and Schrader was great on the ground, had over 100 yards in the first half, and I think that just really set up the offense to have a complimentary game.
I don't know, over to you. The second half wasn't as pretty. They take their foot off the gas because you go up 24-0. It was 24-3 at the half. I think they get a little complacent. South Carolina got a couple scores in the second half from Missouri eventually. It was never really in doubt is how I should put it. Do you think in the second half any cause for concern, or is it just, getting through the game healthy and with a win in the victory column?
I don't think it's cause for concern exactly for that past game, but I think going forward, it kind of felt like a little bit of a disappointment in offensive production. They entered halftime with 295 total yards of offense and 24 points on the board, but they came out almost flat in the second half, and they weren't really trying to keep the pressure on South Carolina. It kind of felt like what they were trying to do against LSU when they went up 22-7, and then they tried to just mosey on and win the game, and they weren't really trying to continue to put the pressure on LSU, and then that eventually came back to bite them. So I think that if you're going to move forward with this offensive mentality of, okay, we have a lead, let's not lose the game, instead of let's go out and put the nail in the coffin and win the game on offense, it's going to be a really hard thing to do against teams like Georgia, Tennessee, and even Florida. Those are going to be teams that are going to continue to make you win the game throughout all 4 quarters of football. So I think that it's a good thing now that Mizzou can have over 400 yards of offense and 34 points, and people are saying it's a letdown. Because, I mean,
we've seen
you're kinda
way too many
spoiled.
bad
Yeah.
performances in the past to feel not comfortable about this one.
Right. I agree. But at the same time, if you have the expectations that Missouri has this season, you need to be able to keep that offensive performance throughout all 4 quarters, and I don't think we've seen that yet this year.
Do you think we can see it?
I think we can. I think it's definitely possible. I think what they would have to do, and one way I think they could have done it against South Carolina, is to continue with the play-action game and continue throwing balls deep downfield. And they kind of went away from that in the second half.
They didn't take any shots in the second half.
Exactly. Exactly. And I mean, Cody Schrader did close out the game well, and the running backs closed out the game well. But against a better team like Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, all those games you're going to have to keep throwing the ball. And I think they need to be comfortable doing that for 4 quarters.
Brandon, we just talked about how there was some running, some passing. How's the offense been able to adapt? Because we've seen games where Brady Cook throws for high 300s, 400 yards. We've seen games now that Cody Schrader goes for over 150. We've seen Nate Peete get in the action. How's the offense been able to adapt as the season goes on? Because it hasn't looked the same as it did against South Dakota and Middle Tennessee, and I don't think it's going to look the same when they play Georgia and Tennessee in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, I think this is something that goes back even to last season when you kind of look at the Arkansas game in particular. That they won that game via Brady Cook's legs, and his athleticism opened up lanes for the offense and stuff like that. Jumping into this season, though, you kind of look at it, they've just found different ways to do what they need to do to pick up a victory. They've won the close games. They've won the semi-blowouts, as you see this past weekend. But offense in particular, they've really found ways to kind of just expand the field through their explosive plays, dominate the run game when they need to. The whole point that Adam's talking about is when you connect all those into one game plan, and at a time when they need it the most, possibly Georgia, they could have one of the most dynamic offenses in the nation because they have all that ability to piece it all together. They have one of the best running backs in the SEC, one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC, one of the best wide receivers in the SEC. If they've got those pieces, then if you piece it all together at the right time, you have the complementary offense that Drinkwitz has been talking about, wanting, and then you can finally play a complete game offensively.
We're more than halfway through the SEC season, so we're doing something different today. We're breaking down the current standings in both the SEC East and the SEC West. We got the graphic pulled up right behind us, starting with that SEC East. 2-time defending Georgia at the top, but Missouri only a couple spots down. They're 3-1 in the conference, 7-1 overall, the best record. Adam, starting over with you. Georgia hasn't looked as good as it had in years past. They won the national championship last year by 55 points, but they've struggled with a couple teams in this list. They're pretty vulnerable in this division, right?
Yeah, I think Georgia is not nearly as good as they were last year or even the year before, which is okay when you win the national championship by 45 points or whatever it was last year. So you can take a little bit of a step back, and they're still, in my opinion, unanimously the number 1 team in the nation. But they are showing that they can be beaten, especially against conference opponents. They've not dominated teams at home, so with the bye week for Mizzou, I think that they've got a really good chance to knock off the defending champs.
Brandon, what are your thoughts on the current state of the East?
I think, though, just the teams to watch for, obviously, are Mizzou's upcoming opponents. Florida, they're in the 2 spot. They play Georgia this coming weekend, so we'll kind of learn a lot about who Florida actually is as a team just against an opponent like Georgia. Tennessee down there, Mizzou gets them after Georgia. It's a team not to overlook. They lost to Alabama this past weekend. Their offense does not look as stellar as it did last year, obviously, with Joe Milton at quarterback, but their defense is legit. I just think it's something to watch. But I just think as a whole, the East is more wide open than it has been in years past, and I think that's just something to take with us as we go forward.
Wendell, if you have to rank right now, Florida, Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, 1 through 4, how would you rank them?
Florida, Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky.
Yep.
I would say Mizzou, Tennessee, Florida, Kentucky.
Okay, and flip over to the West if we can. I know this could be the potential matchup for the Tigers in the SEC championship game. Alabama's 5-0, LSU 4-1. Who do we think is going to win this Western Division?
I think that it's going to be LSU just because they have already played Ole Miss, and Ole Miss did beat them. And Ole Miss, like you said before, they have to play Alabama still. They have to play Georgia still. So they've got not an easy road ahead of them. I do think Ole Miss might actually be the best team in the West this year.
They still got to play Georgia, though.
Yeah, still have to play Georgia. So I think that they just have a really hard road to go through to win the West. And I think LSU is the easiest one to get through now that they've been through kind of the bulk of the harder parts of their schedule. So I think LSU is going to come out on top of the West for another year in a row.
Brandon, if Mizzou somehow wins the East, I know it would be chaos, but which of those top 3 teams do you think they would most want to see in Atlanta in the SEC championship?
This may sound odd because they lost to them, but I think you'd want to face LSU again. One, you've seen them on your schedule already. You know what their defense entails. Their offense, you know ways to stop it now that you've kind of been through them, and especially Jayden Daniels. Obviously, I don't know if you want to face Jayden Daniels, one of the best QBs in the SEC, in a championship game, but at the same time, you have film on him specifically, and there's stuff you can take away from that loss, especially the motivation that you can take from it to kind of carry with you forward.
Wendell, lastly, who do you got out of the West?
I got LSU. I mean, college football, we were just talking about, it's a quarterback sport, and these games are going to come down, I think, which quarterback can make plays under pressure. And Jayden Daniels has shown you can do that, so I'm rocking with LSU. I'm
going to go 4-4. I think LSU also is going to be the team to win the West. They're going to go to Alabama and beat them for the second straight year. That is our show for today. Thank you for tuning in. We're off this Wednesday. We'll be back a week from today for our Halloween special. We'll also be doing a Q&A. Make sure to stay tuned for that. This is the Tiger Kickoff Show. I'm Harrison Vapnek. Thanks for tuning in.